I feel like India certainly has a role to play if, I'm assuming you do.
When governments are thinking of regulating AI, the approach with regard to regulating the applications of AI versus regulating the kind of technology.
So one way to regulate against risks, but not stifle startups, stifle innovation, is frankly to focus on regulating what's really risky, which is the bigger enterprises.
Thank you. It's indeed an honor and privilege to be talking to Andrew. Andrew, sorry for having kept you waiting for a few minutes, but yes, great to have you here on this conversation wherein we are dwelling with regard to all the issues regarding AI in the last few years. And in fact, if I can say lately, with the hype about generative AI and the risk associated with that, it will be so great to have to chat with you. You have been like one of the voices with regard to how open source AI solutions can make an impact. How do you handle risk? How do you handle regulation? So I will be like getting your insights with regard to the pros and cons of open source versus proprietary AIs, the proprietary AI solutions, the advantages, the innovation that can be driven for using open source AI to solve societal problems. We in India, especially with regard to use of digital public infrastructure for solving societal problems in healthcare, agriculture, have been thinking of utilizing the power of AI to solve some of these problems at scale. But very often when we talk of open source AI solutions, always that question of risks and the potential harm is there. So how do you think one can balance, especially with regard to balancing innovation, the need for regulation, especially in the context of open source AI solutions?
Yeah, so thanks so much for having me there. I think the last time I visited India in person was before the pandemic, where I really enjoyed getting to visit a NASScom event. I'm really happy to be here digitally, and hopefully I will visit India in person again sometime. So I think open source has been one of the most important types of building blocks for so much in software, and now also in particular in AI. And what has happened in the last year or so has been intense lobbying efforts, usually from some of the larger tech companies that have made, some of which have made significant investments in training very large AI models. But I was actually pretty surprised over the last year at the intensity of the lobbying efforts to try to get the US government and to some extent other governments to put in place stifling regulations, requiring licensing, maybe reporting requirements, and just burdensome requirements on open source to try to squash open source. And I think that it'd be a tragedy if these lobbying efforts succeed. In fact, in the United States, some are arguing, I think incorrectly, that maybe it's good for the US if we squash open source because the US is ahead of many other nations in generative AI right now. I think it's an incorrect argument, but some are saying that. But if the attempts to squash open source software succeeds, almost everyone around the world, almost all nations will certainly be losers. I think America, I think the United States as well. But if we make it difficult for researchers to publish software building blocks on the internet, free for anyone else to use, this has been a key mechanism of dissemination of ideas and tools. If those efforts to squash open source succeed, it will shut down tons of innovative efforts in AI, make it much harder for lots of countries, including India, but lots of countries to take advantage of this technology.
Yeah, so in fact, you have also been talking about looking at AI as a general purpose technology like electricity. Your analogies have been there. So in that context, when governments are thinking of regulating AI, the approach with regard to regulating the applications of AI versus regulating the kind of technology, whether it's proprietary or open source, you've always been advocated that we must be regulating the applications, the use cases, in what ways it can cause harm. So how do you think the governments can equip themselves to be able to understand the vast range of applications that are possible with the today's technology, especially the generative AI technologies, and be able to kind of have the capacities to understand how it works, devise assessment frameworks, and actually be able to regulate the applications?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I think that just to make sure I'm using the terminology consistently, I think of there as technology and application. So when a machine learning engineer or data scientist takes a lot of data and trains a very large AI model and is sitting on the computer in a data center somewhere, that's technology. when that AI model is put into a self-driving car, the self-driving car is an application. When AI model is put into a chatbot or put into a medical device, then those are the applications. I think the problem with government's attempts to regulate the technology is that AI, as you said, is a general purpose technology, meaning it's not useful for one thing, it's useful for a lot of different things. You know, kind of like electricity or the internet is useful for lots of different things. And what that means is that when you think about this very general purpose technology, it's very difficult to even think about what are the risks of intelligence, you know. And I think that attempts to regulate the technology, regulating the research basically, will just slow down the research and slow down all of these applications, all of these beneficial applications, without actually having any meaningful impact on protecting citizens. In fact, a lot of the lobbyist efforts have been saying, don't you want AI to be safe and to make vague statements to try to slow down dissemination of the technology? But um, when you look at the applications, we could look at a self-driving car and say what outcomes we do and do not want with a self-driving car. If you look at a medical device, well, we want that to be safe. You could think through what are the risks of a medical device and regulate against that. Or, you know, social media, misinformation or disinformation, or underwriting software. Maybe you want that to be safe. So when we look at the concrete applications, we can then more rationally figure out what are the risks and pass laws or use regulations to protect citizens from the risks. In contrast, if you slow down the technology development, I think the heart of the matter is a question of, do we think the world is better off with more intelligence or less intelligence? And yes, intelligence can be used for nefarious purposes, but on average, I think so much of the progress of civilization has been through people getting smarter, more educated, more intelligent. And now we don't just have human intelligence, we also have artificial intelligence. And I would hate to see countries pass laws that slow down the rate at which they can gain intelligence through AI, which is slow down economic development and creating prosperity for many people in all sorts of use cases.
So basically, you are saying that with these AI models, we have the opportunity, the option that we will have more smarter people around. Like if I'm my team, I want all of them to be smart, equipped with AI skills. Some of them are naturally smart, but there are others who can use this AI tools to be able to do the things that they are doing more effectively, more efficiently. So ultimately, the productivity of team goes up. But at the same time, the con of that is that very often people think that it can also be used for this, for building something that can be catastrophic, that can be devastating. Like for example, can anyone use an open source AI model to kind of learn how to make bioweapons or how to do genetic engineering, which can build viruses, or which can create some problem that can be really, really problematic? Is that possible? Is that a risk that we should be worried about, or is that overhyped?
Yeah, I think it is overhyped. So to the question of, I'm going to say something, but please don't anyone tweet out what I say until I finish the rest of the sentence, because the first half is misleading. So the first half of what I'm going to say, which is going to be misleading, let me just say that, is, can AI be used to help create bioweapons? Yes, it can. But so can almost any general purpose technology. Can a web search engine be used to help create bioweapons? Yes. Can Excel spreadsheet be used to help someone try to create bioweapons? Yes, they could use an Excel spreadsheet to track what experiments they're running and be more efficient at creating a bioweapon. So the more useful question is not, can some tool be useful for some nefarious purpose? Is, does it have a dramatic impact on someone's ability to do something very bad? And OpenAI actually published a study like just some weeks ago, and Rand had a study. I've seen a bunch of studies like this, and as far as I can tell, generative AI, similar to web search and Excel spreadsheets and all of these general productivity tools, they help just a little bit in all of these types of tasks, but very little, far less than I think we need to be alarmed about. And just like I'm not freaked out about Excel, being used by a bioweapon designer, maybe I should be, but I'm just, it makes it just a little bit easier. And I think that's why we need to ask. I think red teaming exercises are important, but they do lead to these sensational statements. If someone says Excel can help bioweapon designers, which is actually a true statement, no one is alarmed. So I think it's about the magnitude of the help, not just whether or not it can help. And to be transparent, I'm actually more worried about AI generating misinformation and disinformation at scale. I think that is a worry. So different countries are looking into watermarking technologies and fingerprinting technologies. It's a complicated set of issues. So I think there are risks to AI, but the existential risk one is definitely overhyped. I think bioweapons, I've been trying to study it, and the more I study, the less alarmed I am. But I think it's worth continuing red teaming exercises. But yeah, I think, oh, and I think upskilling. I think as a previous speaker said, probably not a lot of jobs will be lost to AI, but I think a small number will be. But even if a small number of people's jobs are affected, they deserve to have a safety net. I think as a society, I hope we can take care of people. So I think there are a few realistic risks that are worth paying attention to.
Yeah, in fact, the jobs issue is like a real issue, especially in India, like when we have almost 50 million plus people employed in IT, ITS sector, and there's always this possibility of some low value tech jobs, coding jobs, CRM jobs being lost to AI based solutions. So always the issue comes in, like Bernard mentioned about how do we ensure that people have AI skills? Because always, and in fact, you also said earlier in many of your talks and writings that AI will not kill jobs. Not having AI skills, people without AI skills will lose out to people with AI skills. So especially in a country of our size and magnitude, and given that we have a lot of reliance on the IT skilled workforce that we have, and we do have some programs under which we are promoting reskilling and upskilling, but are there ways in which we can push this faster and we can ensure that those who are already doing their tech jobs, how do they acquire AI skills and remain competitive as we move forward in this age?
Yeah, so I hope that online educational tools like Coursera and DeepLearning.AI, I hope we will play a small role in supporting India's efforts in this direction. The fastest growing course on Coursera last year was Generative AI for Everyone, which teaches non-technical individuals how to use generative AI. And I do think that we've reached a point where almost all knowledge workers can get a productivity boost today by using generative AI. So I use generative AI every day, and I think it makes me more productive. And I think really almost all knowledge, I want to say pretty much all knowledge workers, if you learn just a little bit to use generative AI, you could be a little bit more efficient, a little bit more productive. But this is why I'm not. But in terms of the impact of AI on jobs, this is how I think about this. From a business as well as government implementation perspective, while AI affecting jobs is an important conversation, when I go into AI implementation, I find it more useful to think about AI automating tasks rather than AI automating jobs. So a job is often a bundle of many different tasks. So for example, a radiologist, they read x-rays, they also gather patient histories, mentor younger doctors, they operate the machines, they prepare records and so on. So they do many different tasks. And so when I'm working at AI Fund, we often work with our investors or large enterprises on AI to think through AI implementation. And so we'll look at jobs, break it down into tasks, and try to identify which tasks have the greatest AI automation or augmentation opportunities. And this leads to exciting things we do with AI. But from the job perspective, it turns out that for many jobs, maybe 20, 30% of the tasks can be done with AI. And what that means is, 70% or something of the work, we still need people to do that. But, people that use AI will be much better positioned. And I think many people do need, at least a little bit of training to use AI safely and responsibly, which is why I think, my course, Generative AI for Everyone, but really any way for someone to get an education, to get just a little bit of training can buy you that productivity boost very quickly. And while many jobs will have, 20, 30% augmentation, automation, there is that small subset where almost all the tasks can be automated. And so a small number of jobs will go away, sadly. But I think it's probably not as bad as people might be worried it's going to be.
So in fact, if you take the radiologist example, what you're primarily saying is that the AI will not make the radiologist redundant, but it will make the radiologist more efficient. So if we're looking at like extending healthcare services across, say, like the rural areas of India, we'll think of like instead of requiring maybe 2 radiologists per hospital, maybe we can do with 1, so that we are able to solve the problem of shortage of specialist doctors and all, and use AI to augment the output of the radiologists who are working in the remote areas.
Yeah, what I'm seeing now in terms of global demand for radiological services is there's vastly greater demand that there are actually trained radiologists. So what that means is that if we make radiologists, let me just make up a number. Say we can help radiologists become, twice as efficient or whatever. Then I think there's more than demand to just take up all of that services that radiologists can provide. And in fact, depending on price elasticity, right? Sometimes if you make something 1% cheaper, the demand goes up by way more than 1%. And I think we are in that regime for radiology. Not for all jobs, but I think for a lot of, and maybe one of the reasons why, why we should think about, it turns out that it's true that many companies think about automation and cost savings. Often people start there. But we look at businesses implementing AI, even if it starts with cost savings, it turns out you can only save so much money. But the growth opportunity is unlimited. There's just no ceiling to how much you can grow, which is why with most waves of general purpose technology, like steam engine or the electricity or the internet, yes, there was cost savings. I'm not at all minimizing the suffering of the small number of people whose jobs are affected. But most businesses, after they figured out the technology, wound up spending much more of their time pursuing growth rather than only cost cuttings.
So given this whole approach with regard to like how the advantages of using AI-based solutions far outweigh the risks which are there, and the risk can be regulated. But when it comes to regulation per se, we are seeing several models, like the US came up with their executive order, the 111-page executive order on how to regulate AI. Then EU came up with their risk-based framework, the EU Act that they have proposed. The UN has set up the advisory council on AI, which will again come up with a framework for that. UNESCO has an assessment framework for assessing risk for AI solutions. And incidentally, this year, India is the chair of the Global Partnership on Artificial Intelligence. So we are working with OECD and other stakeholders for trying to create a global framework for regulating AI. So given that parallel efforts across the world, what do you think should the global framework for regulating AI should look like? What are the key tenets that it should focus on?
Yeah, so I think Europe EUAI talked about a tiered approach to risk, and in principle, that's actually a good idea. We should look at the risky applications, and in fact, I think one of the things that makes an application risky is if it reaches a lot of people. Frankly, if you operate a social media company that reaches 100 million, people in India, that's just more risky than someone running a message board that reaches 10 people. Just the risk of misinformation and disinformation is much higher. So one way to regulate against risk, but not stifle startups, stifle innovation, is frankly to focus on regulating what's really risky, which is the bigger enterprises. I think that the White House executive order made a mistake in thinking that the bigger AI models are more risky because with Moore's law, everyone's able to train bigger and bigger models. And if you say bigger AI models trained with more compute or whatever is more risky, that's the line that the big tech lobbyists would love to have. And I think that would effectively shut out a lot of countries, including India's easier access to open source technology. So whereas I think there's a false argument that some people in the US are making that America should regulate the heck out of open source models and shut that down, I think it's a bad argument. It's even clearer that this would be a really bad move for India because to not let a small number of US companies that have invested a lot in foundation models and some of which would frankly not have to compete with open source. I mean, the incentives are quite clear, right? If you spend hundreds of millions of dollars training large models, it's actually really annoying if someone else open sources it and anyone can get access and all your hundreds of millions of dollars worth of IP, suddenly everyone has it. So the lobbying efforts in the US are very rational on the part of the lobbyists. What I was really surprised by was the intensity of the lobbying and how they've managed to get some countries to pass laws clearly against their own best interests. But having said that, we do need good AI regulation. So earlier you mentioned that it is difficult to understand and regulate applications. And I agree, it is difficult. And I would also respectfully submit that just because it's difficult is not a reason, not to do it right. And I think we have some time. I think we already have rules to maybe with the number of elections going on, I think disinformation and misinformation, maybe that's one that needs relatively urgent action. But then I think I would rather see governments take the time to do it right than to end up in a regulatory capture situation where large incumbents are locked in. And I'm really passionate about this because um, for so many people around the world, there's so many opportunities to take advantage of these wonderful tools that are being released all over the internet and to build amazing things with them. I think the risk and opportunity to India is India's always had a very strong IT sector, including IT services outsourcing. So the risk is if India doesn't take advantage of this technology and AI automates more and more of this. But the opportunity, which I think is super exciting, is India has so many people that are skilled in software. If these developers learn about AI, and I've been amazed at the energy in the growing India AI ecosystem. So whereas last time I was visiting India, some people were asking me, do I think India should build a web search engine? I would say, you know, ah, probably not. You could do it if you want, but that was the 10-year ago competition. But India, if it acts right with government support, public support for research, for dissemination of ideas, um, I think India could, do kind of play the next game, right? To play a big role in building the next thing that's now possible because of generative AI.
Yes, and in fact, with the potential of generative AI and the diversity that we have in India, especially with regard to the multiple languages and the numbers of people, sheer numbers of people who speak those languages and would need services in those languages, there's a lot of work which is being done by a lot of startups and researchers in trying to build foundational models in Indian languages. And the challenge that they face, of course, is not having sufficient number of data sets to train the models. But I think in the next few years, we'll be seeing a spurt in the number of researchers and startups who will be building such solutions. And that would really, really take the advantage of AGI, the artificial general intelligence, to the masses in India, as we say.
Yeah, AGI seems maybe still quite far away, but I do see that today, if you use the LLMs trained by the large American companies, and you ask them a question about, American history or American geography or government in America or whatever, prominent American authors, they do a pretty good job answering. But if you ask them questions about, other countries, right, including India, they're just lacking the data and not doing as well. So I think one interesting case study, a career did a nice job training a Korean language specific model. I thought that was interesting. And I think there's a little bit of a race on. Will the American companies suck up the data and train the best, right, Hindi and Tamil and all of the different languages spoken in India kind of model, or will India, or does it make sense for India to make a strong effort in that? I feel like I don't know. Part of me feels like it's nice to make sure that, the people really do have different sets of knowledge, different values, different beliefs. So I feel like India certainly has a role to play if, and I'm assuming you do, that India wants its values well represented in its LLMs, in its
And
AI models.
yeah. And it is great getting your insights on this. We are almost out of time, but before we end, you just did mention that you yourself use a lot of generative AI tools in the work that you daily. Many of us are also using Chat GPT, GPT-4, or 3.5 in many ways in the work that we do. What are the other tools that you use which you think can help the productivity of the CXOs and the tech professionals who are sitting in this hall? What are the tools you would recommend for them to use?
Yeah, so I think for the non-technical, CXOs, I think ChatGPT, Bard, Bing Chat. Oh, sorry, Bard's now Gemini, Gemini 1.5, or sorry, Gemini. My bad. ChatGPT and Gemini, maybe Bing Chat, maybe some of the startups as well with alternative offerings. I think they're significant productivity boosts. I run a lot of LLMs on my laptop. When I do really sensitive things, I don't want to send them to the cloud. I use open source or closed source tools to run some of the open source LLMs. So I often run a model, sometimes run the Llama models or Mixtro or Zephyr models on my own laptops. So it's really confidential and proprietary. But then also, there's also this build versus buy decision. When I work with business executives, I find that when we do a task-based analysis of jobs, sometimes for a lot of contact center operations, so basic customer support, or sales operations, or increasingly, your AI fund, we've been supporting a company called AI that does AI for legal work, but for or Puppy Dog AI for marketing. But for a lot of these verticals, they're actually tools that companies can just buy to support a specific function. And so I think making the right build versus buy decision can also get you more tools to give teams a productivity boost. And then it's just as a developer, I don't get to spend as much of my time writing code as I used to. I still, play with technical things. I think it's wonderful to see the open source ecosystem and so many tools from kind of OpenAI, Meta, Google, Amazon, AWS, Azure, LangChain, Llama Index, Hugging Face. There's such a rich Olama studio, but there's such a rich ecosystem of so many tools that we could go and use now.
In fact, it was great having you, listening from you, Andrew. And in fact, some of the insights that you gave is also helping us guide in building the tech platform that we are building for training government servants in India under the project called Mission Karmyogi. It's like building a Coursera for training government employees. So I think and there also some of the courses, some of the skill sets that you mentioned about courses on generative AI, courses on AI, they are one of the most popular courses on that platform also. So I'm sure with the insights that you gave, it will help all of us, and maybe it will help us in trying to build such courses to not only train government officials, but also make it open for everyone else in the industry.
Yeah, thank you. And I hope that when I created generative AI for everyone, some of the user demographics I thought of was actually business leaders, CXOs, and also government officials, and a few other user personas. So I hope that some of the things we're working on, can be helpful to people in India.
Thank you, Andrew. It was great chatting with you, and I'm sure this will go a long way in helping us work on this further. Thank you.
For more content on tech and leadership, subscribe to NASSCOM YouTube channel and press the bell icon to never miss an update.